And I know the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Young, has a lot of insight on this. You talk about a state that has seen some incredible challenges over the years when it comes to the economy, but certainly rebounding now under great leadership of Mr. Young himself, as well as their great governor, Mitch Daniels, and certainly look forward to the comments that you have tonight. And with that, would love to hear your comments tonight.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for your hard work on this issue and your leadership on so many other efforts. And I can certainly identify with the comments that you've made and that the gentle lady, my fellow colleague from Alabama, has made. We've seen an uptick, certainly in my district, of these number of notices and penalties that the aggregates businesses, for example, in my district receive, oftentimes for petty little issues. And it seems that there has been an increase in enforcement from this administration on some things where, frankly, you ought to have these agencies working with our businesses, helping them come into compliance, consulting with them, doing even a little cost-benefit analysis on the ground level. And that we've lost all sense of perspective. And I have to say, as someone who's just been here for a year and a half, I've been a little surprised by a number of things, but perhaps it was my own naivete that led me to expect most of my constituent concerns would be related to how we should vote on a given matter. Vote no on this resolution, vote yes on that given bill. But instead, so much of what I have heard over the last year and a half has been, as much as anything else, stop this regulation from being enforced. It's really killing our business. It's hurting job creation right here in your part of the country. How can you rein in these executive mandates? And so I've tried to do my part, and others have here as well. I'll cite my colleague from Indiana, Congressman Todd Young, who has worked very hard on a project last year and a half that he calls the red tape rollback. Now, I hold right here in my hand a report which Congressman Young's office recently put out that catalogs these regulatory concerns of businesses in my home state and the job-destroying effects of over-regulation. It turns out there's a reason why so many businesses in the Hoosier State are suddenly feeling the crushing effect of regulation, and it's because we've seen a sharp increase in regulations under this administration. Let me throw out some numbers here. Since 2008, there have been over 34,000 regulators added to the government's payroll. Additional regulatory costs have increased by $46 billion per year since the beginning of 2009. The number of regulations with an economic impact of $100 million or more, so-called major regulations, has increased by 32 just last year. By comparison, the last president only added 28 such regulations in his first 3 years in office. All told, this president added 106 through the end of last year. So the list goes on, and I know my colleagues can add to this list, parade of horribles with respect to regulations. Something needs to change up here. I'm glad we're here tonight to talk about a particular bill that will change things for the better.
Well, and I want to just ask a quick question about something that you said there. I believe you said since 2008, 34,000 regulators have been hired by the federal government?
That's right. They've been added to the government's payroll.
Now, you're not talking about, these are individuals whose sole job it is to write new regulations. 34,000 new people to write new regulations.
To write new regulations, to go out there and to pour through books, private sector books, to be boots on the ground to enforce these existing regulations. So we've got 34,000 more individuals who are interfering with private sector activity. Now, I use the word interfering. I acknowledge there are cases where we have to have regulations. I think everyone here would agree with that sentiment. But things have gotten out of whack, and we're really constraining job creation in a time where our constituents want us to be creating more jobs.
And you talk to the greatest generation, and you know that is not what this country was built on.
In everything you've described, from the sports analogy where people are afraid to come onto the field because they don't know the game, to the direct impact it has on all sorts of businesses, that also applies to our nation's financial institutions. You know, it's through our banks and credit unions that so many of our small businesses get off the ground. And that's how oftentimes they're able to sustain themselves during dips in the economy. But unfortunately, there's great uncertainty in the financial sector as well. And we can cite a number of different things, but I'd put Dodd-Frank high on the list. I certainly hear that in my district. Let me relate to you a little story. about the impact of regulations as they affect banks and how they in turn impact businesses in my district and around the country. I visited not long ago a business that manufactures food products, things like these little miniature pizzas that are frozen. You buy them at the grocery store, and little hot dogs with dough encrusted around them. And they're actually an incredibly productive manufacturer of these things, and have developed a lot of expertise. And this company was on the verge of a major expansion. Would have created hundreds of jobs in my district and led to additional jobs because of the supply industry that would have supported this company. But federal regulations got in the way. The company needed a $3 million bridge loan to get everything online and begin production. And they were a dream sort of businesses. They had, to give you a sense of what they had lined up, they had a world-renowned entrepreneur, they had a billionaire investor. The person who had conceived of this business, he put up $1 million of his own money, his life savings. They had several high-profile, nationally known businesses lining up with purchase orders. They'd already secured a new facility and invested significantly in new capital equipment. So everything's online. But the new banking regulations prohibited them from getting the money they needed to take it to the next level. Well, things are finally moving forward for this business. I'm happy to say that despite these headwinds, the founder of this business was able to secure alternative financing from private sources and others. But ultimately, it was regulations that almost killed these hundreds of jobs in my district. This is the sort of human impact that so many Americans and communities are facing right now. This is what we're trying to get our hands on with this legislation that we're passing. And
I just want to throw in a quick, to add to that, the Dodd-Frank Act, there are 36 rules implemented, and it will grow to the 400 required under that act. I mean, that goes to your point exactly. So.
Absolutely. So we've seen this in the ag sector, where traditionally between crops being planted and harvested, it's not uncommon to get bank loans to keep the operation afloat, especially with smaller farms. We see it in all types of businesses. It's time that we take care of these financial regulations and other types of regulations, and I'm glad we're acting here on the Republican side in the House of Representatives.
Well, and again, thank you for sharing that story with us about a manufacturer, a restaurant, food business, I guess, operator that's ready to create jobs if they could just get government out of the way and let them do what they do best, and that's run their own business. And I want to share with you a statement that the President himself has made. And this is a statement that he made recently, saying, and I quote, that rules have gotten out of balance, placing unreasonable burdens on business, burdens that have stifled innovation and have had a chilling effect on growth and jobs. And yet here we are, increasing regulations by this president, by this administration.
We've just lost all sense of perspective. You get the sense where we ought to be measuring the costs of any given regulation, any proposed regulation, and the benefits, and comparing the two. And I think any fair-minded person would take into account both of them, and in the end decide whether or not a given regulation makes sense. I was doing a little research earlier in preparation, coming down to the floor. I just wanted to see what some of the cost-benefit analysis has been for recent regulations. And I came across a report by the National Bureau of Economic Research. It was from a decade ago, and they took a look at some of the regulations that have been proposed over the years. One was child-safe lighters. Now, the Consumer Product Safety Commission determined that a life would be saved for a cost of only $100,000. By implementing these regulatory standards for child-safe lighters. That strikes me as pretty reasonable, okay? That's absolutely worth it. There was another regulation proposed, and conceivably, for a cost of $100 trillion, we might save a life someday by the solid waste construction regulatory standards that our federal government have proposed. Well, there's got to be a sense of balance here. We're gonna crush our economy.
And we continue. Our nation has seen unemployment rates at or above 8% for 41 months in a row. All while the promise of the president's stimulus bill said, you know what, we're going to solve these problems. Unemployment's going to be drastically reduced. We're going to create energy opportunities by giving millions and millions of dollars in loan guarantees to companies that go bankrupt. And yet we have job creators in Indiana ready to hire, but they can't get the money that they need because of regulations. We have a government that would rather give loan guarantees to companies they know are going to fail than to actual job creators that are already succeeding.
And you would think, if I could intervene here, you would think that during a down economy, what some have called the worst economy since the Great Depression, we would stop piling on. It's the first rule of holes. You stop digging when you find yourself in one. But we continue to dig, even though we're in a hole. We pile on new significant regulations on top of the existing significant regulations. So, there's a portion of this legislation that was offered originally by Congressman Griffin. His name is still on it, the Regulatory Freeze for Jobs Act. This places a moratorium on all significant regulations, all those with $100 million or more economic cost on our economy. This is common sense among my constituents, probably among the vast majority of the American people here, that you just stop piling on the major regulations during a down economy. I'm certainly supportive of this. I think we need to go further. Mr. Tipton of Colorado there, you mentioned the REINS Act. It would be my preference that every time we have any proposed rule or regulation imposing a $100 million cost or more on our economy, it comes back to Congress for a hearing, for an up or down vote. Allow our constituents to weigh in on the matter. Tell us how to improve the regulation. Tell us if they think it ought to be eliminated altogether, or perhaps they like it. But in the end, I think we need to own these significant regulations. And you know what? If we pass that REINS Act, that would give all of us an incentive not to punt on the hard issues, not to pass them on to the EPAs and OSHAs and USDAs of the world. Ultimately, we would own it, we would be accountable, and I would invite that sort of scrutiny and accountability.
Wouldn't that be a novel idea?
Just one addition to the gentlelady's comments. The President also ordered a regulatory review of all regulations in that very same speech, and he was going to root out, he said, existing regulations that were constraining job creation. He reaffirmed his commitment to repealing all these sorts of measures. His rhetoric it's not matched by commitment, by action. And so we're acting. We're acting in terms of this piece of legislation. I'm proud of that.
And again, it's an incredible opportunity that the President has to stand up and lead. But it goes back to that very issue. He's required to stand up and lead.
Does anyone know, I'll pose this question to my colleagues, is the President's Jobs Council, are they working on this issue? The Jobs Council?
Well, the gentleman from Indiana brings up a great point, and as I mentioned earlier tonight, there's an article in Politico that was printed last week. The President's Job Council hasn't even met for 6 months.
I've
I
heard
don't know if
that.
they've given up or if he just is afraid they may not support his policies.
I've heard that. Yeah, it seems he has other priorities, but we need to force the hand. We need to make the argument here. This is what our constituents are asking us to do. Every conceivable thing we can think of to create an environment where jobs can be created, where new businesses can be started, when entrepreneurship's at a 15-year low, when existing businesses can expand, when unemployment remains above 8% for how many months now?
I applaud that comment. Let's make American jobs the priority. Let's putting Americans back to work. That must be the priority. And we call on the President to join us in this action.
This ought to be
we're putting
bipartisan.
forward the ideas. We need some partners that are willing to be able to work with us.
Well, I want to thank my colleagues tonight from Indiana, Alabama, Colorado, Arizona, North Carolina, who stood on the House floor tonight talking about what we can do to get this country moving again, what we can do to unleash the innovators and the entrepreneurs across this country. We face a lot of challenges. We know that we face insurmountable debt that we must address. We know this country faces spending challenges each and every day. But we can't build a long, sustainable economy unless we get America's job creators back on their feet.